Welcome to the American Reformer Podcast, hosted by Josh Abbotoy and Timon Cline. Our mission is to promote a vigorous Christian approach to the cultural challenges of our day, rooted in the rich tradition of Protestant social and political thought.
All right. Hello, and welcome back to the American Reformer Podcast. Today, you've got your usual host, Timon Cline, Editor-in-Chief, Josh Abbotoy, Executive Director. We are joined today, again, by a very welcome guest, Dr. Hunter Baker. You should check his work out. He's written many books and articles, much critiquing Rawlsianism and many other wonderful theoretical works. Dr. Baker is the provost at North Greenville University in Greenville, South Carolina. Also had a long stint at my alma mater, Union University. But Hunter, it's great to have you here today. Thank you for coming back.
I'm so happy to be with you guys. Thank you.
And this is we always note this. Anyone who's come back more than once, they're noted for their bravery and
yes.
for their tolerance. Also, very good.
I am so
values.
AMREF friendly.
Indeed.
So I'm
AMREF curious. So Hunter, as Josh noted, you've written a lot of things, and I can't even remember what we were talking about with you last time. It may have been an article you wrote for us or one of your other books. But today we want to talk about your latest book, which came out this summer, Postliberal Protestants, I think is the main title. And the subtitle is, which I think frames things well, is specifically Baptist. You're a Baptist. Josh is Baptist. Baptist between Obergefell and Christian nationalism, right? So recognizing there's been some big developments in that fairly short amount of time. But I think everyone recognizes something changed. I mean, me and Josh have done an episode before on kind of our radicalization. And both of us, in one way or another, pointed to Obergefell as sort of a watershed moment, changed a lot of, it certainly did wake me up to many problems before that. So, but from the top, maybe most of our listeners will be up to speed, but tell us how you describe and define post-liberalism, kind of what you're talking about, and then we can get into the more general framing.
Yeah. So let me even start a little bit with liberalism. One of the things that I say in the book is that when the Cold War ended, Francis Fukuyama said, "This is the end of history." And what he meant by that was that liberalism, by which we don't mean left-wing politics, but by which we mean the idea of limited government and democracy and, by and large, free markets and constitutional rights like free speech and freedom of religion, freedom of the press, that this sort of political arrangement is going to be the political arrangement of mankind henceforth. And that it had sort of been settled by the Cold War. And so we would only really be arguing about the margins of that, right? And so you have kind of a right liberalism that would be more concerned with freedom, and a left liberalism that is more concerned with equality. And that would be everything. And what we have seen instead is sort of a post-liberalism. I think of the right and the left. The one on the right is asking some really big questions like, no, are we actually much more interested in nationalism, or are we much more interested in and I don't necessarily mean this the way it's going to sound. Are we much more interested in race, or who a people is, or are we much more interested in the religious composition of a political community, those sorts of things? Or on the left, the sort of stuff that you associate with woke or critical race theory, the ideas that that no, liberalism was a disaster and was built on a rotten foundation of discrimination and inequality, and the whole thing has to be absolutely dismantled. And and something like free speech is really just a species of white privilege, right? I mean, that's so all of those sorts of ideas are challenging this sense that liberalism is the end, challenging it in kind of a fundamental way.
Well, I think Hunter, especially for younger guys, I was born in '91, so I'm this kind of applies to me as well. I think it's important to point out that it at least appeared for a while that was going to be the case, and that was working even in our domestic politics. That was. I mean, this is the case because that's some of the frustration with post-liberals, with the current makeup of the Republican Party, is like guys are still wanting to talk about, tax breaks or something, something that's like it's non-fundamental, completely irrelevant. Paul Ryan is not where most guys want to go now, but that indicates that there was, at least for a time, one, you could get elected on that basis, and two, that was actually most of the national discussion, even if there were some still fundamental things in play. Gay rights was ascendant, all this. But I think it's important, as someone who was more conscious at the time, that there was totally good reason after the Cold War, at least for a while, to think that Fukuyama was right. This was the way it was going to go.
100%. I mean, we were... I say we like I'm taking the blame. I do not take the blame, but certainly I went along with it. After the Cold War, we thought American values are completely ascendant. That explains our approach to dealing with 9/11. We really did believe that we would go over to the Middle East. We would be greeted as liberators. We would fundamentally transform that area, not with our guns and our bombs, but with our values. And we also believed that opening up free trade with China was going to be the way to create the greatest liberal democracy, the world had ever seen. We're going to totally transform China. And neither of those things happened, right? I mean, our Middle East adventures turned out to be a spectacularly expensive failure. And China, what we have done to China is they continue to be illiberal in the worst way, but they're rich, right? We've created our own kind of Thucydides trap, where they're the rising hegemon, that's going to take us on. So in that sense, it turns out that those values were not as transformative as we hoped they would be. Certainly, they didn't possess the kind of inevitability that I think that Marxists once believed about their own philosophy. And we're seeing the same is true of our values as well.
Yeah. I always think too, I'm sure I've mentioned this in a podcast before, but I always think of the famous X telegram from George Kennan that was later published in Foreign Affairs, right? Where this is early before the Cold War's really getting going. And he just makes the point that actually, I think this is always lost in the talk about containment strategy, that actually the primary focus should be domestic policy, that you have to have a stable and even moral sort of domestic populace to survive, what's coming. And it seems to me that the victor, sort of blinded by success in the Cold War, that we were pretty actually inattentive to our domestic life, maintaining our, particular standards, virtues, all these things while we were out abroad, gaining ground. And then that continued for decades afterwards, and then finally has exposed itself. Does that analysis make sense to you?
Yeah. And I mean, I really think so. In one sense, the end of the Cold War, I can't tell you what it was like to be a college student watching the fall of the Berlin Wall. Even now, I would tell you this is one of the greatest things that I ever saw. And if I could time travel, I would go back to that time just so I could see it again. And feel that again. But there's also a sense in which the end of the Cold War was bad for Americans. And what I mean by that is that the Cold War caused us to have an intentionality about who we are, right? Like I can tell you that as a school child in the public schools in the 70s and 80s, it's clear to me in retrospect that there was a real effort made to convince me of why America is good, why it's important, the value of our system of government, the value of our Constitution. We just didn't have this same relentless focus on deconstruction of the thing that we do now, and I think the reason for that was that the powers that be thought, okay, we have to keep the American people convinced that what we're doing is the right thing over against what is being done in the Soviet Union or in places like Mao's China. And I think that once that ended, there's a real kind of letting down of your guard, and you're just kind of drifting. You're just sort of drifting, and all you really care about is prosperity.
Yeah, I mean, part of why I'm wanting to highlight this, and I think it's good, is there is clearly, I know this is somewhat far afield from your book, but there's clearly like generational confusion or disagreement, and I think I didn't live through it, but I imagine, and you're expressing this the way you're talking about it. I mean, we just don't know what it was like to live through that time of prosperity, but also just total confidence. It doesn't seem to me that was broken until sometime after 9/11. Certainly not after 9/11. I mean, I do remember that, and the amount of patriotism and support for. I mean, I can't. I am not a George W. Bush fan now, but I still get teary-eyed when you see him throw out the first pitch after 9/11. Right? Yeah. I mean, there's just was something amazing like that about that we probably won't experience again in our lifetime. Total solidarity, and in many ways, focus, willing to do lots of crazy things because we were like that. So I think it's important to say, this is what the boomers lived through and baby boomers lived through. There's a totally reasonable explanation for why they are the way that they are. And, most of us can't viscerally understand that. So that's why I'm highlighting it, is it doesn't negate some of the contentions we're going to discuss or reassessments. But I think it's important to point out that anybody who lived through that time period would feel that way and probably believe most of the things they believe now.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Josh, unless you have anything on that sort of prologue.
I hasten to add, as you talk about the boomers,
yes.
Anytime I deal with somebody below a certain age, I am not a baby boomer.
Okay.
As I tell my children,
very good.
I am not a baby boomer. I'm the forgotten generation.
You're the forgotten generation. Okay. Yes. But this is important because you're a translator. You're a link to the past.
There you go.
Hunter. This is an important role you play.
The only other thing I'll add, just to buttress this point, is I was recently rereading Whittaker Chambers' The Witness, and among other things. But one of the things that you had in the course of the 20th century was you had these like totalitarian regimes that were aggrandizing functions of the state. They were trying to be the family and the church, and I mean, in a real sense, they were trying to be godlike. And so, it's very easy to understand how, in contrast to that, with that as the foil, the American way was really defined by, we have freedom. We're a society that has subsidiarity, and all of that's actually because we believe in God, and we don't need a state that has divine-like attributes of omnipotence and omniscience and all of that, and so just buttressing that, it's a very that was very much the defining struggle of the 20th century in a lot of ways. And perhaps it's not as much the defining struggle today. But yes. Nonetheless, created, I think, a generation of conservatives who really thought of Christianity's government as being primarily about freedom and, the government leaving room for the church to do its work. And conditions as you note, are shifting. So
I just have to say, I would talk about Whittaker Chambers all day. I love Witness. Witness to me is one of the great American books ever written. One of the best memoirs. that was ever written. I actually sometimes go out and give lectures to donors about the about the Chambers Hiss case. So first of all, I just want to encourage everybody listening to get that book and read that book. It's absolutely amazing. You could also read about it in Richard Nixon's famous book, Six Crises, because that controversy with Alger Hiss, it made Richard Nixon. There's no way that Richard Nixon is Eisenhower's running mate without that. There's no way that he ever becomes president without that. But the thing I want to say about Whittaker Chambers is, and it's relevant to our discussion, is that after all that is over, Whittaker Chambers loses his job as one of the senior editors of Time magazine. Even though Henry Luce wanted him back, other people at the magazine were like, "No, he was a Soviet spy. We're not gonna take him back, right?" And so Chambers has to figure out what to do with himself. And Bill Buckley, young Bill Buckley, is entranced by Whittaker Chambers, and he's like, "I desperately want you to be part of National Review." He's begging him, and Chambers keeps saying no. He keeps saying no. And finally, he acquiesces and he participates in National Review for a short time. But Chambers is never really comfortable with National Review because for him, sort of the small government, semi-libertarian sort of emphasis is never the right fit. He's definitely an anti-communist, but he's not sure that kind of the small government free market thing is really the path. He thinks that it's too thin. And you need something stronger to oppose against communism.
Which would have been another guy at National Review. I mean, Russell Kirk would have been of a similar critique, even internally, and didn't last, all that long at National Review for that reason.
No, Kirk actually wrote for them for a very long time. He wrote a column about universities, but he was always dissatisfied in that same kind of a sense. That's right. And
was Kirk ever on the masthead? It seems like he was.
I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. You would think he was because he had a standing column.
Yeah.
It was focused on universities. In fact, Brad Berger wrote a fantastic biography of Kirk.
Yeah.
And I recommend that book to everybody as well. And one of the things that he talks about is that he blames too much writing for National Review for denting Kirk's output.
Interesting.
After that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wonder who someone will say that about with American Reformer one day. Their output could have been better if they hadn't written so much for American Reformer.
Chambers' prescient, I'd say, unease with National Review sort of presages Solzhenitsyn's, commencement address at Harvard, right, where the audience is expecting this laudatory pat on the back from the Russian dissident, and he comes and says, "You don't believe in God anymore, so you're going to lose too." But yeah. We should probably turn back to the book.
Let's get back to the book. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so what's give us the setup for the book then. We're talking about much we've been talking about now is sort of movement conservatism post-war, and conservatism had successes for a while. There's perfectly good reason at the time to think that the general liberal thesis was correct as a historical matter. Optimism was high, but this is broken over time to get us to our current reassessment, which you could say is somewhat messy, but things have happened.
Yeah, you pointed out my subtitle where I talk about Obergefell and Christian nationalism, right? So those are sort of my opposite ends. Obergefell is critical for a lot of reasons. I mean, so on the one hand, I think Obergefell really launches the post-liberal left. I think that they look at Obergefell and they're like, okay, this is a big moment for us, not only because they wanted to achieve it for a long time, but because once you have Obergefell, and I spent 20 years dreading its arrival, right? I knew it would be coming. But the reason I dreaded it is because Obergefell puts Christian orthodoxy officially at odds with the Supreme Court's interpretation of the American Constitution. And I have a whole chapter about the potential terrible effects of that happening. Now, things are in a better place now based on the composition of the Supreme Court, but still, it's still a major problem. So there's this sort of increasingly aggressive secularism, sort of left-wing secularism, and Stephen D. Smith. So I keep pointing to other authors. I love Stephen D. Smith. Stephen D. Smith talks about it as pagan secularism, right? So there's a positivistic secularism that was sort of the Oliver Wendell Holmes type, where just sort of rejecting morality altogether, right? This kind of, the natural law is not some omniscient cloud in the sky, or something like that. But Smith points out, that proves to be unuseful, right? You get to the trials at Nuremberg after World War II, and the Nazis are quoting Holmes, right?
Yeah.
The Nazis are like, look, Holmes said that law is nothing more than, whatever the majority of people or the regime says, right? And so Smith points out that they give up that positivistic secularism and they move to what he calls a pagan secularism, which they fill with whatever they want. And that's where you get sort of this revolution in human sexuality, among other things. So that's one problem. And then on the other side, from my point of view, is the Christian nationalism idea. And it's not, it is very important to me to distance myself from what I feel like is a lot of hysteria. I feel like the people who are interested in talking about Christian nationalism or Catholic integralism, or, I think that they attract a lot of hysterical critics. But what I would say, my opposition is based as much on my view of social science and history as it is on my view of theology. I think that the Baptists have basically been correct about the importance of separating the church from the state. And by which I mean, and so here's another place you have to clarify. The left was successful in making a lot of people, including the court, believe that the separation of church and state is secularism, right? That it really is sort of cleansing the public square of religion, the public square, public spaces. Sometimes they would even argue that in the voting booth, that you must have a secular motivation for the choice that you make, as if you can split yourself in half and just, divorce your faith from the rest of you. So I'm very eager to say that I support the institutional separation of church and state, that the church is never the dog on the leash held by the state. And I think that we have many, many examples of how that has occurred. England is a tremendous example. England to me kind of represents sort of an end state of Christian nationalism. They still have the Archbishop of Canterbury marrying the princes and princesses, and presiding over major things and still receiving state support and things like that. But does it matter in that society at all? Other than in kind of maybe an aesthetic or ceremonial kind of, it doesn't, right? It doesn't matter at all. Whereas in the United States, where we have really had sort of a free church tradition, and really everybody has bought into it, at least prior to this current period, including the American Catholics. What you see is a church that is far more vital, right? Where's the most secular place on earth? It's probably Western Europe, which is the home of sort of Christian nationalism par excellence, I would say. So to me, I view it the same way I view 20th century collectivism. We ran the experiment, it failed, and we need a different model.
What would you say, Hunter? Just curious on this. One, you could have an argument that there's the time, all things are finite, right? And they're going to fall apart. And so the run that maybe Western Europe and England had far exceeds the run that America has currently had, just as a matter of time. We're not that old. So the experiment we're running, it still remains to be seen what comes of it. And then also you could argue that part of what expedited the secularization of Western Europe and England is the exportation of American liberalism that the rest of the world has had to conform to. And so that effectively, as you are pointing out as well, I mean, England has a separation of church and state because the church is irrelevant. It doesn't hold the power it used to. We just saw Charles, with his, he's the defender of all faiths now. I mean, it's entirely secular. It's all fake, but they've maintained some of the form of it because, that's the easiest way to do it actually is to keep the titles, Octavian tells us how to do this. Leave all the titles the same and just exercise the power the way you want to. So what about those arguments that one, America is much younger. So it may be not sufficiently similar cases to compare. And then two, part of what expedited the fall of Europe in this way is our exportation of liberalism. Even in the 19th century, the fall of all the monarchies, Russia just being the last one, sent things into chaos. And that before that, maybe there was a better chance of, maintenance and course correction. So, what do you say to some of those arguments?
So many things that I want to say. So first of all, I think that those are reasonable arguments. You mentioned I was in London for the first time back in May, and I was on a bus tour, and they were lauding Charles as the defender of all of England's faiths. I just almost gagged, right? I mean, it's just one of the worst things I ever heard.
You and Al Muller. Al Muller freaks out about this.
Completely nonsensical, right? And the Muslims in London definitely don't believe that, right? Yes. I mean, let's be clear about that. And there are so many factors that are different, right? So technology. I mean, we spend a lot of time arguing about, intellectual movements and things like that. I would tell you, I actually believe that the primary reason that we have gay marriage is because of the invention of the birth control pill. By which I mean, before the birth control pill, sex means reproduction. Right. I mean, it's inextricably linked, the idea of sex and reproduction. And of course, marriage and reproduction, because marriage involves sex, which leads to children. And once you really break those things apart, then people say, oh, so marriage is not for reproduction. Marriage is for companionship, or something like that. And then gay people begin to reason, well, it's the same for us, right? We are also, pursuing the good of companionship or whatever else. And so in that sense, technology causes a sea change in the society. So we have to take account of those kinds of things as well. And the other thing is that yes, so I'm lauding sort of this American tradition and the value of the free church in America, but I'm also sympathetic to what I would call sort of maybe the Christian nationalist, and maybe it's not just Christian nationalists, maybe it's other sort of adjacent communities who would make a kind of a Flight 93 sort of an argument and say, look, you're losing and you're losing and you're losing. The left makes stride after stride, and the church becomes increasingly marginalized, and fewer people care. And they're getting all the public policy victories, at least up to a point, right? And you guys, this is the big Eva. I take the big Eva. You're just the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters, and you lose every game, and you're satisfied with your pay after the game, right? I mean, I totally hear that. I think I do not think that it is unreasonable to make these kind of arguments that you make. I just continue to be convinced that when the church ends up uniting with the state, that the logic of power and politics ends up overruling the logic of theology, and that the church ends up in a bad place when you do that.
There's a lot I want to jump in here. I mean, I think this is very constructive to define sort of the contours of where the discourse is right now. But, I think that when I look at sort of the motive, and I'm not a self-described Christian nationalist for various reasons, but, I read a lot of this. But when I look at the motives, I think that are animating a lot of the current Christian nationalist discourse, part of it is defensive, yes, but I actually think there's a little bit of I think some people see tremendous opportunity right now, because I think that there's a broad recognition amongst young people that our social order is broken.
Yes.
Our social order, maybe since the 60s, has been, I mean, perhaps you call it expressive individualism or what have you, but, it's defined by Kennedy and his Casey opinion, right? This idea that everybody has the right to define the sweet mystery of life for themselves. That's not a way to run a society. And I think there's like a broad increased recognition of that. And so maybe to flip the question a little bit, I think that really at its best, what Christian nationalism is somewhat saying is that we want some kind of positive vision for returning to a Christian social order. And I guess I think as a Baptist, a card-carrying Baptist, I have ideas about how that can be accomplished in a way that doesn't get us to the full sort of full state church type arrangement. And there's lots of things along the way before you get to sort of a full-fledged establishment in the old-fashioned sense. But I'm curious for your ideas, like what, are there political ways that you can support a Christian social order?
Yes, but first I want to kind of think in terms of what the Christian nationalists are doing. I'll tell you the way I translate them, because I'm not sure that they actually mean what they're saying. What I kind of translate is that I view them and maybe Doug Wilson, who is his own thing. I view them as almost like the Bolsheviks. Now, I don't mean that they're Marxists, but what I mean is, so the Bolsheviks, I don't think the Bolsheviks were really ever a majority. At the time when they kind of take over in Russia, which then becomes the Soviet Union, I think that they thought that if we can get enough energy behind enough people, that we can kind of overcome the indifference of the masses and obtain power, and then once that power is in hand, make some moves, right? And I almost view Stephen Wolfe and some of these other folks in the same way. They think that American Christianity has become too much of kind of a bland American liberalism that is insufficient to really move people, especially politically. And so they need something bolder in order to do that. And this is the formulation of the thing that is more bold that they will use to move people. That's what I think is going on.
Yeah, I think there's some. I mean, I think some of these writers are express about that. Some are less so. But I think Stephen. I think he actually says in some places he's trying to awaken a political consciousness among Christians as a block. And I think that but I do think the conditions that we're in right now are favorable for a move like that because again, there's wide dissatisfaction with the current social order. So, and I think there's a lot of vying for what is next, like as the defining public orthodoxy in America. So yeah.
Yeah, I find the whole thing generally very positive, right? Because what it means to me is that we're actually talking and thinking about it. Yeah. It will help us, all of us, I think, to develop a greater intentionality about the whole question. So I'm completely in favor of it. I obviously have a different view of how we should proceed, but I like the conversation very much.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my constant refrain from two people that are maybe concerned or whatever, they're just not into it. This is certainly in my lifetime the first time that there's been serious discussion in-house with Christians. It gets noticed from the press, and of course they predictably freak out the way they're supposed to. But in-house, people actually taking their political theory or theology seriously because they have to, either because they're reacting to new proposals, which I don't think something I always say as well is like, look, no one was proposing anything. So you can't get mad that the first guy to propose something isn't what you wanted. You weren't out there doing it. Big Eva was not doing it. So you need to, that's cause for some humility, and also that the table's already been set. You have to now engage with what's been proposed. And if you don't like it, come up with something better. But I think it's for productivity's sake, as you're pointing out, I think it's a total net positive. It's making people think about things, especially younger people that just weren't thought about for a long time. And the evangelicals were always on their heels, reactive and derivative, if not of mainstream society, of the intellectual work of Roman Catholics, which there's a lot of great stuff, but it's not ours, So you're always making adjustments, and it's kind of derivative. So I think it's in that way, if that's what it produces, it's absolutely great. And that's why, we also love the conversation. I did want to go back to your point about Obergefell, because I think this is a good one to say, to mark it as an historical point when at least evidently post-liberalism starts. Because, Adrian Vermeule, who himself would describe himself a post-liberal, has pointed out in a great article, I forget where, about Obergefell, that it was like the acceptance of gay marriage was probably going to happen anyway. It was already happening. And the magisterium, as it were, the court has to sort of authoritatively rub your nose in it and make it universal overnight, boom, here you go. And then the conflict started soon after. So I think that's a totally illiberal move, we might say. You didn't let the process unfold. You didn't continue to use persuasion, all these things. So it was the first time in my lifetime that I remember this is real power exerted. This is what it looks like. And that was, as a young law student, was like a significant thing, because you're being told how the system works, in law school in this very nice, gentlemanly debating club way. And it's like, that's not what's happening. But then also I wanted to ask you about, if you read it the same way, it seems to me that this was a watershed moment, and conservatives generally, the three of us excluded, others excluded, but Obergefell is kind of just accepted now. I don't see big outrage about gay marriage. I don't see much discussion about it. It was like conservatives were totally deflated afterwards and didn't know what to do about it and just accepted it. And, other things have happened that deserve attention. Of course, always abortion, trans, these things. But what explains, maybe Josh, you have a comment too. What explains that sort of just giving up the ghost, as it seems to me?
Well, so there's something behind all of this that I think is important to say. We were talking about Rawls a little bit earlier. So I think all of us have been to law school, so we probably all remember. And maybe it's different for younger people than it is for me. I was there in the 90s, but we talked about sort of the rational basis test, right? Mm-hmm. And the way I was taught the rational basis test is that the state almost always wins under the rational basis test, right? That my New York liberal Jewish female law professor said, I can't imagine anything losing on the rationality, the rational basis test, unless it was like a law that said everybody has to wear a green shoe on their left foot on Thursday, right? And then you see, the rational basis test used to advance, homosexuality, right? On the idea that there could be no rational way to be at odds with homosexuality other than sheer animus, right? Never mind that we could go to Aristotle, for example, and we say, well, what is the fundamental unit of society? Aristotle would not say the individual. He would say the procreative pair, right? There is no society, there is no future without the procreative pair. So, the pair, then the family, then the clan, then the village, then the city-state, right? So certainly there were ways to reason other than pure animus. But what happened is, and I've written about this in one of the books dealing with Rawls, is that there is a transplantation of Rawls's concept of public reason over against the old rational basis test. And that is a constitutional revolution. And I think that is too little noticed as we discuss all this.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's a good point. We had
and you mentioned the court rubbing people's face in it, and Rawls wouldn't put it that way, but he does. The Supreme Court is the exemplar of public reason, right? They are supposed to make these authoritative pronouncements of public reason.
Yeah, and I think I'm reminded of the title of Ryan Anderson's book, "Truth Overruled." Great title, right? But I think one of the effects of Obergefell for young legal conservatives was actually very stark delegitimization of the Supreme Court, maybe comparable to Roe. I know Roe was also similarly contentious, and it took a political issue and resolved it at the federal level. But in my generation, I think that the overturning of Obergefell created a lot of doubt for young legal conservatives about the sort of the positivist approach that we tended to be baked in the Federalist Society, right, where we we're interpreting the Constitution and then honoring, deferring to stare decisis, and I think younger conservatives were radicalized and really moved in a more results-oriented direction because they saw in Obergefell, that perfectly safe proceduralist language could get you to the Obergefell result. And that's when you see the birth of common good originalism or common good constitutionalism. And, of course, that's when Vermeulen really starts taking off in popularity and prominence. So it was a watershed for sure in the conservative movement. And I think probably invited some radicalism. I think some people, people started to feel like, wow, the strategies we've been using are not getting us wins. They're not even defending like basic social goods at this point.
100%. And I mean, so all three of us, right? We've been through a legal education, and we have observed all the people with whom we were in school. I don't think that we would say it's the case that law school turns you into a brilliant moral philosopher, right? I mean, there are many positive effects of law school. I love law school, but it does not turn you into a Platonic philosopher king who is suitable to guide the whole nation. And I think that is what the court has kind of turned into, or at least did. Maybe we'll walk away from that. But these pronouncements, right, in Roe and Obergefell, that's where you're going, right? Is that forget the democratic process, forget the moral deliberation of the American people. We are instead going to act as though we're kind of a philosophical moral elite who simply pronounces the right answer, and has the same effect as amending the Constitution, which is really hard. Yeah, except not with a court.
When especially you mentioned Aristotle already. In the most fundamental way possible, if you're going to redefine the most fundamental relationship that undergirds the polity, that's the most basic and biggest constitutional change you could possibly make. And no one seemed to treat it that way afterwards. Again, I did see, people just kind of, there was lots of hard fights, against, we already mentioned Ryan Anderson, and they were making their case in some ways, effectively, very publicly, getting lots of attention. And it was just like, it was totally circumvented. And, we're just, and I just always think of the Obergefell, like if there's one line, the line is like, that it stands for is not fast enough. You guys need to move faster. You're too anachronistic. We have too many deplorables that don't like this. It's not going, even though it's all happening, but not fast enough. It's a similar parallel in my mind to, mass immigration. It's like not fast enough. You guys let people in. You're very hospitable and all this, not fast enough. And so that's when we're sticking on Obergefell a long time, but that's why I think it is important to your framing of it and to make it sort of the moment. It's as good as any moment to say this is where something, a corner is totally turned by everybody. It has to be. There's no option after that to go back to what was before. The left instigated this. They were already doing it and into it. It's just this is the sort of coming out party. And then the right's just been playing catch up since then.
Yeah. And so, first of all, yes. And both of these things, you get this massive never go back kind of a viewpoint, right? I mean, with Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which was about 20 years after the original decision. Basically, what they say is too many people have relied upon this. Too many people have relied upon Roe to go back, right? Mm-hmm. And you get the same kind of logic from somebody like David French, I think, with regard to Obergefell, right? Mm-hmm. Now that this has been granted, do you dare go back? That kind of thing. Yeah. But one of the things that I think is too often overlooked is if we thought about, so who is the most establishment member of this court? Who would you say? If I said, who's the most establishment-minded member of this court?
The current court?
John Roberts.
John Roberts, exactly, right? Yeah. And yet, go back and read his dissent in Obergefell. John Roberts, who did everything he could to save Obamacare because he is concerned about, not undermining the legitimacy of the court. John Roberts looks at Obergefell and he says, for 5,000 years, human beings have understood what marriage is, right? And now, today, we propose to change that legally, constitutionally. And then his line is, who do we think we are? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's in that dissent.
Yeah.
Right? That's John Roberts.
Yeah.
I think that, people don't pay enough attention to that.
Well, I also like him outing himself there as a young earth creationist, for 5,000 years. It's great.
No. So as somebody who teaches in Christian colleges, I always talk about, well, look, guys, we only have like 6,000 years of written human history that we can consult. And every time I say that, I say, I'm making no comment on the age of the earth. Yes, I'm just telling you, this is kind of the history that we have. That's and right. In that history, gay marriage is not a thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's an excellent. I mean, that just highlights how far we've come, because what you're citing there is probably unexpected for most people. That John Roberts was. Even people that follow the court, and know he's a sort of a minimalist, institutionalist. These things, those concerns are still obvious, but that shows you how far away 2015 is.
Yes. Yes.
In any case, okay. So Obergefell is sort of a moment of departure. How do you, broad strokes? We've already touched on Christian nationalism too, but how do you describe the time, the 10 years in between? We just passed the 10-year anniversary of Obergefell. What is happening during that time that leads us to the moment where now if people weren't following the court or really thinking about what Obergefell meant, what happens in between that now it seems like most people do understand in one way or another what Obergefell sort of unleashed?
Well, so I'd say there's some positive and negative sort of developments. I mean, so positively, I was not a huge Trump guy in 2016, nor have I ever been. I'm not a giant anti-Trump guy either, but I think that his election was helpful in the sense that it happens not long after Obergefell, and so his presence in the White House puts an immediate stop. He has Betsy DeVos like as Secretary of Education. It puts an immediate stop to a lot of the harmful stuff that could occur immediately in the wake of Obergefell. For example, I was very fearful that you could just have a simple, Department of Education regulation, not an executive order or anything, that would effectively end Christian higher education in America, for anybody sticking with a traditional version of human sexuality. I think that they could have done that. And I think that Donald Trump kind of, by getting elected, sort of stopped the clock, allowed things to mellow, blunted the momentum, that sort of thing. So there's that. And they've continued to have sort of these obstacles, electoral obstacles that have maybe blunted whatever ambitions they might have had in the immediate aftermath of Obergefell. The other thing is COVID, right? I just read this fantastic book by a couple of Princeton political science professors in which they are really saying everything about COVID. I mean, we're talking about elites, and they're admitting all the failures, all the mistakes. And I think that COVID has probably also blunted the ambitions of the state with regard to, it has caused people to become more distrustful, more skeptical, to ask more questions. And I think that's probably helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, from anecdotally, the amount of pastors, this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about Christian nationalism. The amount of pastors I talk to or hear from, it's pretty regular at this point, that in their story is they were totally normal. And then COVID happens. Not only do they get, an unsolicited sabbatical forced upon them, but their people are now asking a lot of questions about political life and authority and American history and all these things. And they have not only the time, but the reason or the cause to go and start looking at things. So this is when guys started reading Samuel Rutherford and stuff. They never got it in seminary. Yeah. They've never had time for 20 years to do it because they're pastoring. And then they do have the time, and now they have Google Books, and that just leads them on a totally different path of reassessment. Even, these are the good cases, like within the tradition of Protestant political thought, right where we want them to be. But this is what caused it. And so now on the back end of COVID, they have very different opinions than they went into COVID with. They're just totally different people in that way. So I think it's in that sense, is in that positive COVID was. And I think what you're pointing out is very, very important also, that part of what we should be thankful in a way that there's a couple things, unexpected things that have slowed down the advance of the left, even if it doesn't always feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we're starting to come up on time here, you've been very, very generous with it. What's your sort of predictions or even desires for the future of where a lot of this stuff is going, even particularly for Baptists? What do you want to see from Baptists and Protestants generally? What do you want to see them doing? How do you think they need to engage these developments we've basically been talking about the whole time? Where do you and then also where do you, even desires aside, where do you think things are going?
Yeah, so if I could pick one thing that I think that we need to think about the most, I think that Tocqueville said about Americans, and I think that this is still true, that we have a terrible tendency to mistake being in the majority with being righteous or being correct. And I think that we need to help Christians divorce themselves from idolizing majority attitudes, idolizing whatever the fashion is. I think that we need to help people understand that, yes, our government works on the basis of voting and democracy, but we also understand in kind of a Romans 13 way that all political authority comes from God. It all derives from God. And so we need to not sort of make an idol of consensus, right? We need to encourage people to go further back than just what the majority wants or who's winning that sort of majority horse race, and go back and say, yes, but what would God's authority tell us? What should we be thinking or believing based on God's authority? And I think that we need to be working very hard to kind of spread that understanding within the church, and to to be more disciplined about helping people think in those terms. So that's kind of the big thing that I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, this is somewhat interacting with, Aaron Wren's thesis. Do you think, there's critiques of it, valid ones, whatever, but I do think when we look at, as Protestants, for wanting sort of our self-consciousness as a block, as a group with particular interests in these things, looking at what both Jews and Catholics have done in a fairly short amount of time as sort of discrete minorities with that consciousness, they've been able to have outsized influence, even generally, but especially within the conservative movement for a long time, because they had that kind of sense of themselves, an institutional sense of themselves.
Yes.
And it seems to me that evangelicals, for a whole host of historic reasons, one, fundamentalist modernist debates, the split of sort of Protestantism in America between liberal and conservative and these things, but also the general sense, even as evangelicals, that for a long time, you're just the default. You don't have to act like a minority because you are the majority. Everything kind of goes your way. And that's totally different now. And so it seems to me, looking at other religious groups and how they operate, even as we may still have a slight numerical majority in some places, is really important at a strategic level for evangelicals too. But I think that's hard for us to do.
Yeah, I think that people need to have a heightened awareness of sort of the Richard Niebuhr categories, of Christ against culture, Christ above culture, Christ of culture, that the more you understand those categories, it helps you to think about how the church should be, but also about the mistakes the church can make. I think that we are always super tempted, and I think that this happened to the mainline church. We're always super tempted to want to be the Christ of culture, right? We always just sort of want to reduce the friction and just sort of mirror American culture, and to kind of be the ritual, ceremonial mascot of American culture, when instead we need to do more of what Francis Schaeffer used to talk about, which is sharpening the antithesis, making it clear what the differences are and places where we simply cannot depart.
Yeah. Yeah. And that doing even that maneuver does require a certain kind of confidence and even assertiveness that when your standard operating procedure has just been to mirror or affirm or sort of baptize the culture, right? I mean, you find your own, maybe you find your distinct arguments, but the cash out is it's basically the same of what everyone else thinks. That assertiveness and that sort of confidence that someone like Schaeffer had and others does seem to be lacking too. I mean, it seems to me to be a thing that maybe not expressed, but more than anything else, younger people are reacting against Big Eva for. And it was evidenced during COVID, especially to many people, is like, you don't, our leadership, ostensible leadership, does not have the assertiveness and self-confidence that to represent us as a distinct group. And that's what we want. I think people are mostly tolerant of mistakes and everything if it's like failing in the right direction. But they just totally saw their leadership fail them in many ways over the past decade, doing the exact Christ of culture maneuver you're talking about. Okay, I think, is there anything else we need to point out from the book and your treatment that we didn't get to? There's probably plenty in there we're not touching on, so people should go buy it. We'll put it in the show notes. But any particular point you want to make?
Well, I'll come back to a Tocquevillian point that I think is very interesting. Tocqueville kind of makes this point that we can err by turning the church into a political engine, right? So we always need to be aware of that. There's Megan Basham's book, right? Shepherds for Sale. She does a fantastic job of talking about how people on the left want to capture parts of the evangelical movement. There's some of that on the right too. So for example, I can remember being in the ERLC, of which I'm still a part. And we had we produced a statement on AI, And the Koch Foundation had a guy in the room, right? They were paying for our gathering, at our meals, and every now and then he would, kind of step in and encourage a light regulatory touch, which would fit with sort of the Koch Foundation's sensibilities. We need to recognize that the church and evangelicals as a body are an attractive target for all kinds of people in American political life. And what we need to make sure is that what we're putting out there is truly organic and wedded to Scripture, and that we don't fall prey to being used or manipulated by those who don't have the same priorities that we do or should.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I mean, I saw Ryan Burge point out the other day that with essentially dropping or negating the Johnson Amendment at this point, churches are going to become very important, at least at local political levels. Because if you have a town of 10,000 people and 2,000 people are at a megachurch, that becomes a very important place, for everyone. And so what I think pastors, Protestants generally need to accept is like, look, that you have this influence and function, and it's going to be expressed one way or the other. It can either be that it's influenced by outside actors, or you can be the ones that demand those outside actors act the way you want them to, according to your standards, not their standards.
Yes.
And that they have to really do the thing. You're not going to be easily placated. You are going to say, we want, this particular type of virtue and representation. And so not in that sense, not running away from the fact that you have a political public place, pastors are public offices, but using it the right way. And it seems to me evangelicals have done one of the two opposite, which is to run from it, pretend it doesn't exist, or two, to just sort of capitulate to whatever is the zeitgeist.
Yeah, and we crave the validation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anytime a big politician wants to speak in our church or something like that, we're flattered.
Right.
It makes us feel important, and that could be by somebody who's a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah. Well, Hunter, it's been so good to talk to you again, and always appreciate your insights. And everyone should go pick up the book. I think it's at bare minimum will be stimulating for them to see kind of why we're at this moment and what the contours of it are. Anything else you want to point to and promote that you might be working on or have done recently, and we can drop that in the show notes also.
I think that's it. I'd love for people to read Postliberal Protestants, and and I'd love to interact with them if they want to reach out to me. I'm easy to find on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. So find me and let's talk.
That's right. And as I think all of our conversations on this show have demonstrated, you're a good faith interlocutor. That's why I like you. You might be the last remaining liberal, but we like you for this reason. The last
not a left-wing liberal. Not a left-wing liberal.
Left-wing liberal. I'm a liberal too. We're all liberals.
Americans are pretty much liberals by and large.
That's right.
But it's up for grabs.
It's up for grabs.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate you, Hunter, and thank you for coming on again. And audience, we appreciate you also. Thank you for listening. Do go subscribe and all that. And until next time, God bless.
You can find American Reformer on the internet at www.americanreformer.org or on x.com, formerly Twitter, at @AMReformer. Don't forget to like, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Please consider supporting us today by making a tax-deductible donation through our secure online donation portal at AmericanReformer.org. That's AmericanReformer.org.